You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Thank you, Dan Michaels. Radical Russ here, coming to you live and direct from beautiful, legal Onionville, Tragic County, Oregon, right across the border of Mordor. I can see Idaho from my house, the last prohibition state in America, and we are fighting to turn all of American states into the legal paradise that we've got here in the state of Oregon. Thanks for joining me. So much going on. I still am battling the end of a cold. It's not COVID. It's just a cold, but boy, it sure does a wonder on you when you're trying to talk for 2 hours a day. Lots to cover on today's show, so let's get right to it. Our guest today is Keith Stroup, a really good friend of mine, a mentor from when I worked at NORML. He's joining us today at the end of this first hour and bleeding on into the second hour to discuss NORML at 50, a career of 50 years fighting for the end of adult marijuana prohibition. A lot of great anecdotes and remembrances from Keith Stroup. That's coming up at the end of this first hour. But to start things off, we'll get you started by catching up on the cannabis headline news of the day. And then we'll take a look in drug war data mining at the latest Gallup poll numbers for marijuana legalization. There are some firsts in there that we've got to get to. And take a look at the marijuana census. You know, now we have so many more states that have legalized marijuana, legalized medical marijuana, that there are so many more Americans now who live under a legal marijuana regime. So we'll take a look at those numbers in drug war data mining. In government at work today, we're going to take a look at the northeast of the country, where New Jersey's 2-1 legalization vote just last week is causing ripple effects throughout the entire northeast. We'll take a look at a few of the states there, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, and so forth. Also, in toking on television, boy, how far we've come since I first began reporting on marijuana, and you couldn't get television to talk about marijuana whatsoever. I've got some news from Dave Chappelle, Tiffany Haddish, Ellen DeGeneres. We got some clips to play for you about mushroom parties at Dave Chappelle's shows that he's been putting on during the coronavirus pandemic. And then in hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, after we finish up our discussion with Keith Stroup, we're going to talk about some Southern cruelty when it comes to our nation's veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, veterans who need and use medical cannabis, who are treated so harshly by the governments there that still maintain prohibition. That's coming up in hour 2. Also in hour 2, look at the Biden administration. Their incoming transition team seemingly forgot their pledges about marijuana legalization or decriminalization. Well, maybe not. We'll see what that's all about. And we'll take a look at New Jersey, where legalization's kind of hit a little hiccup after its 2-1 win. And speaking of wins, you know, I want to report down to Washington, D.C., where Fox News is reporting on people celebrating the victory by President-elect Biden over President Trump.
Others popping bottles of champagne, some people yelling and screaming. Not a lot of violence or any kind of real commotion here, primarily perhaps because of just how much marijuana is being smoked. The smell of that is quite pungent in the air right now.
Wait a minute, Fox News. Didn't you have Alex Berenson on a whole bunch recently telling us that marijuana leads to psychosis, leads to violence? Like, you can't have it both ways. Either marijuana makes us axe murderers or marijuana makes us mellow, but you can't have it both ways. And also, speaking of victories, it was certified Arizona and Georgia for Joe Biden, bringing his total to a 306 electoral vote victory over Donald Trump. You know, I looked up Donald Trump's Twitter account. He talked about a 306 vote electoral victory. He said that someone would lose that. They'd be losing so badly if they lost by 306. He said a 306 victory was a massive electoral college landslide victory. Massive, he said. Well, got to get the patch for that software. Those beds are supposed to be softer than that. We're doing it live from the border of Mordor. Thanks for joining us. I'm Radical Russ. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back after this with your cannabis headline news.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville, the sole producer of this 24-hour marijuana music and cannabis conversation stream that I call Radical Russ Radio. As part of my mission to educate and entertain people about the need to end adult marijuana prohibition, I produce the Russ Belville Show podcast every week, available absolutely free wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you who'd like to help support my mission financially, you can become a Radical Russ Radio VIP at patreon.com/radicalruss or by clicking the link for Hour 2 in the main menu. For just $4.20 a month, VIPs will receive the exclusive download of Hour 2 of my podcast, Toker Talk Radio, every week. Upgrade to the $14.20 a month tier and you'll get Toker Talk Radio every week, as well as the 5-minute cannabis headline news every weekday. You'll also receive a set of custom patriotic pro-marijuana stickers from me every quarter. And if you can afford to support Radical Russ Radio at the $44.20 a month tier, you'll get Toker Talk Radio, Cannabis Headline News, and each quarter you'll receive a poster, then a mug, then a t-shirt, and finally a hoodie that proclaim your support for ending adult marijuana prohibition. I literally cannot do this without you. I do not accept outside advertising so that I will have no conflicts when it comes to reporting on the emerging cannabis industry. Your support is my sole means of continuing this work, and I thank you for it. Visit patreon.com/radicalruss and become a Radical Russ Radio VIP today. Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville. You know me, I'm from Idaho, where we've got 2 strains of marijuana, got some and don't. But until I can help legalize marijuana in the Gem State, I can still bring you the best the hemp plant has to offer at Boise Hemp World. Boise Hemp World features the Mama Duck line of CBD tinctures and pain creams and the Billy Dogs line of CBD pet tinctures and dog treats. Hemp World also features CBD candy, gummies, gum, spices, and a whole assortment of tie-dye and hemp clothing and accessories. And under the laws of America's last absolute prohibition state, all Hemp World CBD products are 100% THC free, so you won't fail any drug screenings. Boise Hemp World, now with 2 locations, our flagship store at 6928 West State Street in the Glenwood Shopping Center, and our new location at 1720 West State Street in the Albertson Shopping Center. We're also the headquarters for the Idaho Cannabis Coalition's campaign to legalize medical marijuana in 2022. Find us online at boisehempworld.com or call us toll-free at 844-IDA-HEMP and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, November 13th, 2020. I'm Russ Belville. The House GOP has posted a blog which attacks the party over a planned vote on the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, or MORE Act, which removes cannabis from the Federal Controlled Substances Act, among other things. The Post notes that, quote, Democrats previously intended to vote on this bill in September, but pulled the legislation from the floor because they did not want to have to answer questions at home before an election about why they were spending their time on something like this instead of making a bipartisan deal to provide critical COVID relief, end quote. Negotiations to provide additional relief in the form of stimulus checks to the American people dealing with COVID have been stalled over Democrats' refusal to accede to Republican demands for reducing the amount paid to people and increasing the benefits for wealthy corporations. In separate published op-eds in the Washington Post and USA Today, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren rejected attacks from the GOP over advancing marijuana law reform, pointing to the results of the 2020 election in numerous states. All over America, voters approved progressive policies to improve the lives of millions of people, Sanders wrote. Voters in Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota voted to move away from the war on drugs and approved legalizing marijuana. Progressive ballot initiatives won across the country, Warren wrote. Multiple states, red and blue, passed ballot measures to legalize marijuana. In fact, marijuana legalization in New Jersey and Arizona received more votes than President-elect Biden in winning those states, while legalization in Montana and medical marijuana in South Dakota and Mississippi received more votes than President Trump's winning vote total in those states. With control over all 3 branches of state government, Democratic leaders in Virginia are confident they can shepherd marijuana legalization through the legislature and onto the governor's desk in 2021. Delegate Mike Mullen from Newport News, who chairs the House's Criminal Law Subcommittee, says he believes there are enough votes in the chamber to end prohibition of marijuana. saying, quote, "It's high time we actually make this change, and I think other people have seen that as well. I can tell you, I think it will pass," end quote. House Majority Leader Charniel Herring of Alexandria agreed with Mullen that a legalization bill could clear the chamber, saying, quote, "I think it has a good chance," end quote. Senate Majority Leader Dick Soslaw from Fairfax has said in the past that while he backed decriminalization, he wasn't certain he would support legalization. However, Soslaw put the odds of passage at, quote, "slightly better than 50-50, end quote. As for Governor Ralph Northam's thought on legalization, his chief of staff Clark Mercer said, quote, "He is certainly open to it," end quote, but wants to know more about the issues of youth use and industry regulation. Despite voters' approval by a 2-to-1 margin of a marijuana legalization referendum last week, lawmakers in the New Jersey House and Senate committees are pulling bills on legalization due to conflicts over revenue allocation. In the Assembly, Speaker Craig Coughlin wants to add a licensing fee for marijuana users to raise revenue in addition to marijuana taxes. Senate President Steve Sweeney and lead sponsor Senator Nicholas Scutari quickly pushed back, saying in a joint statement that the state, quote, "should not impose any additional taxes that will put the cost of legally purchasing marijuana out of reach for the communities that have been impacted the most," end quote. They also asserted that increasing the tax rate would hurt efforts to eliminate the illicit market. Civil rights activists have also criticized the bills for not setting a high enough tax to repatriate profits into programs to help communities most ravaged by prohibition, and for their lack of home grow provisions. Regulators from 19 states who administer legal, recreational, or medical marijuana programs have formed an industry group to coordinate their efforts nationwide. Norman Birnbaum, the new inaugural president, said in a press release, quote, "The Cannabis Regulators Association, or CANRA, will provide a much-needed forum for regulators to engage with each other to identify and develop best practices, create model policies that safeguard public health and safety, and promote regulatory certainty for industry participants," end quote. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, November 13th, 2020. I'm Russ Belville. To get your Cannabis Headline News podcast every day, become a patron of Radical Russ Radio at patreon.com/Radical Russ.
The Russ Belville Show reminds you to never smoke and drive impaired. Hang out for a while and share.
Now, as a service to listeners considering the use of pharmaceutical medications that, unlike marijuana, are approved for medical use by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, the Russ Belville Show presents the Big Pharma Ad of the Day.
Jardiance can reduce the risk of cardiovascular death for adults who also have known heart disease, so it could help save your life from a heart attack or stroke. And it lowers A1C.
Jardiance can cause serious side effects, including a rare but life-threatening bacterial infection in the skin of the perineum.
Whoa. Wait a minute. Say that again?
A rare but life-threatening bacterial infection
Life-threatening infection?
in the skin of the perineum.
That spot between my genitals and my anus?
A rare but life-threatening bacterial infection in the skin of the perineum could occur. Stop taking Jardiance.
Medical
and call your doctor
marijuana.
right away if you have symptoms
Not
of this
recommended
bacterial
by the
infection.
FDA,
Acidosis.
but it won't cause fatal taint rot.
Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
All right, welcome to the Data Mines. It's time for us to take a look at the latest Gallup poll on marijuana legalization. This is something I look forward to every October. This year it was delayed a little bit. You can imagine why. Lots of possible reasons, the election, the COVID, But the Gallup poll's finally out, asking Americans once again, should marijuana use by adults be made legal? They've been asking a version of this question since 1969, and the first time they asked it, it was 12%. 1 out of 8 people in America thought that I should be a criminal for smoking weed. There shouldn't be a criminal for smoking weed, right? 1 out of 8. When I started my career in marijuana law reform in 2005, the Gallup poll that had most recently come out showed it was about 36% supported legalization. So about 1 out of 3, little over 1 out of 3 people thought that I shouldn't be a criminal for smoking weed. Over the past couple of Gallup polls, this number has been about 66%. So in the span of just my time being around, and I'm not saying I'm responsible for it, I'm just saying coincidentally happened, we got from 1 out of 3 to 2 out of 3, right? Well, the latest numbers are out, and it's even getting better. The number of Americans, the rate of Americans that believe marijuana should be legal nationwide is 68% at this point. 68% believe that marijuana should be made legal for all adults. So up by 2 points overall. It's gone up among Democrats and gone up among independents. Democrats support it at 83%. So we're getting close to, 7 out of 8 territory, and 72% for independents. So we're getting close to 3 out of 4 in that respect. There was a demographic that's gone down. We had actually gotten Republicans over the hump. We'd gotten them to 51% supporting legalization. This Gallup poll, it went down to 48%. Well, still pretty close. And another new demographic to finally support marijuana legalization, people over the age of 65. When you break it down by age groups, of course, 18 to 30 is just, off the charts when it legalized. But 65 and older had been holding as our only age group that was against it. Now they're for it. The people over the age of 55, that number is up to, 55%, I think it was. There you go. 55% of people over 65 think it should be legal. And this kind of goes along with what we're seeing among seniors. They're the fastest growing demographic of marijuana smokers. Their use is up. Their monthly use is up over 600% since 2005, right? It was a little number to start with, to be, fair, but that little number has grown a whole bunch. And why not? Because, older folks realize this is good for insomnia and joint problems, aches and pains and depression and all sorts of things. So that got me to thinking, too, is just, how popular this is in America. Well, how many Americans now live under legalization? We know 2/3 of us want it, but how many live in legalization? If you're smoking a joint right now, what are the odds in America, if you're just a random American, what are the odds that a cop can't arrest you? Well, we got 15 legal states now. Haven't all gone into effect, but they will. Let's just assume they will. And I looked up the 2019 population on all those states and added it up, and it turns out there's 111 million and change. 111 million people in these states and District of Columbia where there's legal marijuana for all adults, no medical excuse necessary. That works out to 33.89% of the population. Now, just to be honest, those population numbers are all people. That includes children. Marijuana is not legal for children. But the ratio of children to adults is roughly the same in most of the states. And what the hell, this is just back of the envelope math. So about 33%, 1/3 of America lives where marijuana is legal. All right. So 2/3 of us want it, but only 1/3 of us are living where it's legal. So half of the people that want it legal aren't getting it. I think if you do the math, you carry the 3 in the numerator divisor. Okay, yeah, we got it. All right, let's talk about medical marijuana, though, because we added Mississippi as a medical marijuana state. There are 36 states now with medical marijuana. You add up the population of all those states, comes to 195 million and change. That works out to 59.53% of America. Let's round it up to 60 and say that 3/5 of America live now in a place where they have access to medical marijuana. If you're really sick, if you're really sick, we won't put you in a cage. Okay, well, let's talk about the CBD states, right? We got all these CBD states. Oh, I'm sorry. No, my mistake. 3/5 of America live where it's decriminalized. My mistake. I misread. 3/5 live where you'll only get like a ticket or less, right? You won't go to jail. 2/3 of America. 2/3 of America. That's 225 million people live where it's medical. And if you talk about the CBD states, 99.5% of America live somewhere where if you're using a low THC CBD oil, there's no way a cop will arrest you. Because there's just one state, one place in America where 1.7 million Americans can be arrested for the possession of industrial hemp and its products. 1 out of every 200 Americans live in America's last absolute prohibition state, the state of Idaho.
Yeah. Want to tell ya?
Watermelon and pickle. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's that 20 after break. It's 4:20 here in the Mountain Time Zone, and as is required here by our union contract, we must take our mandated safety briefing. And so let's get at that.
I sure would like to meet that funny reefer man.
Oh, you will, my dear.
I sure would like to meet that reefer
Come back with Governor at Work talking about Northeast lawmakers sensing the writing on the wall.
He must be tight like that reefer man.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
Warning. Hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they aim you to say that.
Are you sure this is legal?
I don't know. It's fun though, isn't it?
A public service message from the Russ Belville Show.
Reforming America's marijuana prohibition laws takes education, lobbying, and voting. From Washington, D.C. to your state capital to your city hall, marijuana law reform involves all levels of civic life. Learn how you can make your impact with elected officials as we take a look at our government at work. We were talking about decriminalization of marijuana, taking a look at our marijuana census, and we find that 3/5 of America currently live where marijuana is decriminalized. And broadly speaking, what decriminalization means is that there's no arrest. You're not cuffed and stuffed, right? There are some states with decrim that it's still a misdemeanor, like in Ohio, but you're not arrested in that case. So that's generally what they mean by decriminalization, whereas I prefer decriminalization meaning there is no sanction, no criminal charge, no ticket, no fine. But generally speaking, decriminalization means the ticket only type of. Yeah, and usually for a first marijuana offense or a first or second offense, there's a lot of caveats throughout the law. And one of the most recent states to pass decriminalization is the state of Virginia. And some good news on that front as we take this look at the Northeast, because New Jersey passing marijuana legalization by referendum and a 2-1 vote, that's just sending shockwaves throughout the entire Northeast as far as passing legalization in their states. A lot of them have been promising this, like New York has been promising this for a while and haven't been able to pull it off. Well, Virginia's moving along that direction as well. Recently, Virginia has become all Democratic in its House, in its Senate, in its governorship, so that the one party has control and can actually make things happen. So one of the things they've made happen in this decriminalization is there's legislation now to stop searching people and stop seizing their property just based on the smell of weed. This was always the one thing I've never liked about decriminalization is that the smell of weed is still a problem, and especially prohibition. The smell of weed is a problem. It gives you away as a criminal. I remember how many times I would buy chewing gum and some sort of spray, body spray thing when you're living in Idaho, a place like that where there's prohibition, and the smell can get you an unwanted look, and then next thing you know, you've got a free ride in a cop car. So this would take effect after changes adopted from recommendations from the governor's office. The new law says that stops related to motor vehicle and law enforcement policy in stops say that, quote, no law enforcement officer may lawfully stop, search, or seize any person, place, or thing solely based on the odor of marijuana, and no evidence discovered or obtained as a result of such unlawful search or seizure shall be admissible in any trial, hearing, or other proceeding. Fruit of the poison tree there. So great news coming out of Virginia, where we're getting more and more of our rights, the right to smell like weed. It's okay to smell like weed. I know some people don't like the smell of weed. I don't like the smell of Axe body spray. Hey, that's freedom. That's America. There's going to be some smells you don't like. Taking a look around the Northeast, we can also look up at Connecticut, where the House Speaker there is saying that legalization is inevitable.
Look, I don't want to get into a policy discussion. We have a caucus we have to have. Look, marijuana has been a long time. I've said I believe it's inevitable at some point, especially when your neighboring states are doing it. We don't have revenues yet, so it's really hard to say where we're going to be.
So, inevitable. I remember for so many years, we couldn't get any legislator to get to even tiptoe around the idea of marijuana legalization. You win an election 2-1, kind of looks more and more like it's inevitable, doesn't it? And so Connecticut being tucked in there, really close near New Jersey, near New York, which last week we played some clips from Governor Cuomo, from Mayor de Blasio in New York City, talking about, again, the inevitability of marijuana legalization. It's got to make our opponents just feel terrible about this. Now, in New Jersey, as they're moving on this, there's some progress and there's some backsliding. Most recently, the committees there in the Assembly and the Senate have kind of put a hold on the bills that are moving forward because people have concerns over how the regulations are going to be structured. And basically, it boils down to who's going to get rich, who's going to benefit from this. And many people on the left are fighting for this to benefit people of color, communities that have been devastated, the formerly incarcerated folks that have been devastated by the war on drugs and the over-policing that was a part of that. So they're pulling from the left saying, hey, we want to make sure that as far as the rich part happens, that it's all not a bunch of MBA white guys that, had nothing to do with trying to get it legal or helping any of the people that got hurt from the prohibition. So I'm sympathetic to that call. I think fixing the war on drugs should help the people that were impacted from it. I'd like to emphasize that there are a whole lot of white growers in Northern Triangle of California that were also impacted, but we'll figure that out. This should help everybody that was impacted, but I agree it hurt people of color far more often and far worse. That's beside the point. The point being, we're getting pulled on the left in New Jersey as far as that, and in other places, in New York too, being pulled on the left for social equity provisions and social justice provisions in legalization. But then legalization in New Jersey and other places is also getting pulled on from the right. And in this case, I'm saying the right being business interests, even in the marijuana industry, business interests. They want to make sure they got a monopoly on where you get your weed. I'm talking about home grow. They want to make sure, hey, 2-1 people wanted legal marijuana, but not growing it. Well, come on now. How can it be a crime to cultivate something that is legal to possess? At what point did so long as it's dead, you can have it. So long as it's dead and dried or processed into a brownie or something, you can have it, but you can't have it when it's alive because what is this, Little Shop of Horrors? Feed me, Seymour. Come on. growing a couple plants ought to be legal, at least 2, 3, 4. It seems to be the consensus is coming down between 4 and 6, 3 mature, or 4 total, whatever. And trust me, folks, you can get a lot of marijuana off of 4 plants. But New Jersey's moving forward. This is Annette Keano. She's talking about that pull from the left I was talking about.
So much time, effort, and thought has gone into this bill, and although it's not perfect, today is the first conversation for what I believe will produce a stronger piece of legislation with a focused eye towards social justice and equity.
And then in nearby Rhode Island, they're also looking at legalization. They've had medical since 2006. They got a strong activist base there. The the Senate Majority Leader there, his name is Michael McCaffrey. He sees the writing on the wall.
I am open to the idea. I do not have a position on it. Some of my colleagues have been talking about it. I know the governor proposed it in her last budget. I think election day 4 or 5 states approved recreational use of marijuana. It's on the table.
I'm sorry, that was the House Speaker. I was right the first time. The House Speaker, Nicholas Mattiello, the outgoing speaker in his replacement, that was his replacement, Joe Shekarchi, and I hope I'm pronouncing that close to right, Joe Shekarchi, speaking on that on the House side. This is Mr. McCaffrey, the Senate Majority Leader.
Time has come to legalize adult cannabis use. We have studied this issue extensively, and we can incorporate the practices we've learned from other states.
So, as you can see, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, these states are moving rapidly because of the massive turnout that we got on election day for these marijuana measures. And they see when things are passing 2-1 in a place like New Jersey. And they see when things are passing with even majority support in South Dakota for legalization. That's got to be a shot across the bow of red state governors and red state representatives. The marijuana issue is more popular than you are. By far, the marijuana issue is more popular than you are. We actually looked it up. You know me, I look shit up. Marijuana got more votes in New Jersey, South Dakota, Montana. Montana. Trump did win 8,000 votes more than the marijuana legalization. That was the only state. But the rest of them, South Dakota, Mississippi even, marijuana got more votes. All right, we're going to take a break. I got to get something from my throat. Oh, it sucks doing a podcast when you got a cold, I tell you. Beats a ventilator, though. When we come back, some toking on television. Dave Chappelle, his party's legendary in Ohio. He's been doing some concerts since COVID, and both Chris Rock and Tiffany Haddish dropped the dime on him on The Ellen Show and Jimmy Fallon right after this.
Almost busted in Laredo, but for reasons that I'd rather not disclose.
I smoke pot, and I like it a lot. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer to use than alcohol. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting responsible marijuana smokers in America. And to learn what you can do to help, please contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORML.
The show was long and we were just sitting there, and we'd come to play and not just for the ride.
And now, another episode of Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre. I'm your host, Leonard Pinth-Garnell III. Tonight we revel in the hilarity of acquiring cannabis when miscommunication occurs between the cannabis delivery service and the consumer. The Royal Shakespearean Cannabis Theatre Company presents the classic David's Not Present piece, made famous by Richard Merrin and Thomas Chong. Enjoy.
Hark! Who goes there?
It is I, David. Pray grant me immediate passage, good sir. I come bearing a package of great import.
Hark! Who goes there?
It is I, David, as I previously informed you. Make haste in unlatching this portal, for I believe the constable hath cast his visage upon me. I bring you the package you seek.
'Tis David?
Affirmative, my good man. 'Tis David. Now open this door forthwith.
David's not present.
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinth-Garnell III.
As marijuana becomes normalized in America, more television shows are examining our society's relationship with the healing herb. Learn more about the latest cannabis-centric shows on TV in this edition of Toking on Television. A couple of amazing television interviews that happened recently. Marijuana Moment caught up on these. And it's just amazing to me because the willingness now of some celebrities to be able to speak about not only their marijuana use, but their use of other drugs, in this case, entheogenic substances, more particularly magic mushrooms. The first clip here comes from the Ellen DeGeneres show. Of course, Ellen back on the air after a little bit of a scandal with her staff alleging that things weren't so keen and fun at the show now and then. But she's back and had Chris Rock on the show. And Chris Rock was on talking about doing performances out in Ohio at Dave Chappelle's property. Not his property. I guess he rented a farm or something where he has these socially distanced comedy shows. And he's got the big wigs, big comedians out there. Michelle Wolf coming out there and Sarah Silverman and a bunch of others, and Chris Rock and so forth. So Chris Rock was on Ellen's show, or at least zoomed in, as we do now during the COVID pandemic, and was talking about the festivities at the Dave Chappelle show and how there's just a whole lot of mushrooms being used there. So let me just play you the clip. This is Chris Rock from the Ellen show.
Yeah, see, I was trying to be nice because your show's on in the daytime, but we do lots of drugs. Okay. Not the hard stuff. Not the hard stuff. We're like before Coke. You know what I mean? Like, okay, Coke, let's stop. But so there's a lot of weed. There's way more weed than anyone should ever have, right? And there's a lot of mushrooms.
So there you go. Mushrooms going on. And he goes on to talk about the mushroom tea and how Tiffany Haddish, the actress, she was there at one of the parties. She's also a comedian, so probably doing some stand-up. And if you've seen Tiffany Haddish recently, she's shaved her head, right? She's got the rocking the shaved head look, which, hey, I'm all for that. She had nice hair and shaved it all off, right? And, well, Chris Rock in this Ellen piece talks about how she was there at the Chappelle party and had gotten talked into taking some mushroom tea, and that's what convinced her that she needed a haircut, that she'd shave her head. And so perhaps this latest haircut that we're seeing from Tiffany Haddish is mushroom fueled or mushroom inspired. Now, this got the attention of the local news in Ohio. Around where Dave Chappelle lives. He's actually from, not a small town, like, one stoplight, but a smallish town in Ohio, and still maintains a property there, and people know him, and he interacts with the community, right? So the local news got in touch with the sheriff because, marijuana's decrimmed there in Ohio, but it's 100 grams decrim, but it's still a misdemeanor. It's still a crime. And, of course, mushrooms are a scheduled substance. You can't have those. Those are a crime in Ohio. So they got in touch with the sheriff of Greene County, Gene Fisher's his name, and they asked him, what do you think about, there's mushroom use going on at Dave Chappelle's place? And, well, the Sheriff Fisher, he tries to laugh it off. He says, quote, Chris Rock's a comedian. Chris Rock is probably looking for jokes. People have been making jokes about marijuana and drugs for years. Hopefully, that's what he's talking about. Yeah, sure, Sheriff. Mm-hmm. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's exactly what he was talking about. It's just a joke. It's all ha-ha, funny. Except we have corroboration. We have two witnesses now. Chris Rock was one. And then on a later appearance, or I don't know if it was later or before, but on an appearance on the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show, Tiffany Haddish was on and got to talking about these shows out at Dave Chappelle's place because, being asked, what are you doing during COVID and so forth. And, well, Tiffany Haddish kind of dropped a dime.
I went to Dave Chappelle's, right, to do some comedy. And I drank it, and John Hamm was there. And as John Hamm is talking, he started to look like Felicia Rashad. And as I started looking around, everybody started looking like Felicia Rashad.
And if you don't know, younger listeners, Felicia Rashad, she was the Mom Huxtable. She was Mrs. Huxtable on The Cosby Show, wife of wide receiver and sports commentator Ahmad Rashad. And Felicia Rashad's done plenty of other work aside from Cosby Show, but most people are going to know her from that. So, yeah, Tiffany Haddish talking about tripping on mushroom tea. Thinks John Hamm, the actor, not Ganja John, John Hamm, the actor, looks like Tiffany Haddish, although Ganja John looks a little like Tiffany Haddish. No. Amazing that this is, being brokered on national TV, on The Tonight Show, which, okay, that's late night, sure. But on Ellen, America's favorite daytime talk show, that's just amazing how much change we've made, and it's reflected in the change that we've seen here in Oregon where I can't be arrested for any drug. Literally, any personal user amount of drug I can only get a ticket for here. Not that I'm trying. Not that I've got a checklist, folks. Come on. But still, just the concept that there's a level of freedom here. And that freedom only happens when people's minds are ready for it. The decriminalization of all drugs here in the state of Oregon, I believe, and if I'm remembering my numbers correctly, I believe it passed with a greater percentage than we passed medical marijuana in 1998, and a greater percentage than we passed legalization in 2014. It's like 59%. I think it was 56 for legalization and 55 for medical. You know me, I look shit up, but I'm going to have to go verify that after the show. But those changes happen because people's minds are changed, and people's minds get changed when they hear from others. That's what got marijuana legalized and medicalized, was hearing from people with cancer, hearing from people with AIDS, people who were suffering and found relief in this plant. And then after those stories became acceptable, people's minds were opened up to hear the story of the person who just likes to smoke pot for fun, but lost their job. They just like to smoke pot for fun, but they got arrested. Some manner of discrimination for people that chose a safer substance than alcohol to have a little fun with. And I believe this next wave that I feel like I'm surfing on now, the drug decriminalization, the drug policy wave, is the next wave because, folks, there's a whole lot of other substances out there. And there is a problem within the cannabis community of being a bit bigoted when it comes to other substances. This idea of hard drugs versus soft drugs. You heard it even in what Chris Rock said. Oh, we stay away from the hard stuff. Well, what makes a drug hard or soft? Right? Where is that line? Is it lines? Is it literally lines that makes the difference? Okay, so is a coca leaf a hard drug? If cocaine's a hard drug? Is an opium poppy a hard drug? If opium's a hard drug? I mean, where do you draw the line on these things? If mankind processes it, is it a drug? Well, then maybe dabs are a drug. These are the kind of questions we're going to discuss on the Russ Belville Show in the forthcoming weeks and months, because I feel like expanding our horizons. And I feel like there is a great amount of mind expansion, growth, whatever you want to call it, that we can benefit from as a society by trying to get over this bigotry we have against certain substances versus others. And to be fair and honest about it. And it's not all wine and roses and fun. There are problems with drugs. There can be problems. Believe me, I understand this as well. But we're going to be honest about it. All right, when we come back, our special guest, Keith Stroup, the founder of NORML, looking back at 5 decades of ending the war on certain American citizens using non-pharmaceutical, non-alcoholic, tobacco-free drugs. Right after this. Coffee Pod in Sumter, Oregon is your fast, friendly marijuana shop nestled in the beautiful Elkhorn Mountain Range outside of Baker City. We're serving Eastern Oregon and Idaho's Treasure Valley with the selection of flower, pre-rolls, vapes, dab, and edibles you need at the prices that make it well worth the drive. Don't venture to some well-watched parking lot in some border town dispensary just to take a number and wait in a long line for your cannabis products. Make the drive to the Coffee Pot in Sumter and deal one-on-one with your bud tender with no waiting. See, feel, and smell the products you're after and make your purchase knowing your tax dollars are helping a small tourist community that needs it. Plus, every dollar you spend is a point toward our Bong Bucks program that earns you coupons on glass and accessories. The Coffee Pot also honors our military, seniors, teachers, and first responders with a 10% discount. And as always, OMMP patients pay no 20% tax. Come on up to the Coffee Pot in Sumter, the first business on the left, on the side of the 2-story log cabin restaurant, and tell them Radical Russ sent you.
Warning. Hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they pay me to say that.
Hey, man. Am I driving okay?
A public service message from the Russ Belville Show. The cannabis community is a diverse set of people from all walks of life. conservative and liberal, black and white, straight and gay, rich and poor, and everyone in between. Learn more about the people we are freeing from adult cannabis prohibition in our Cannabis Community Chat.
Welcome back, everybody, and joining us here for a special interview segment is the founder of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's Keith Stroup joining us from Washington, D.C. Are you in Washington today, Keith, or are you at home?
No, I'm working from home. I go into the office maybe once every 2 weeks to check the mail and things like that. But otherwise, D.C. is still essentially shut down.
Oh, so you're close by in nearby Northern Virginia, right?
Yeah, I'm in Falls Church, just across the Potomac.
Well, there's been a lot of activity going on in Virginia. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But the main subject for our interview today is the fact that it's the year 2020, and that means the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws is 50 years old. And what a great 50th birthday present you got, 50th anniversary present you got with this 2020 election, huh, Keith?
Yeah, I'll take it. Let me tell you, it was I felt like I had weight lifted off my shoulders when the election results finally were called.
Yeah, it's just an amazing thing. We'll talk about that as well. But I want to talk first about history. You know, this 5 decades that NORML's been involved in the fight to end adult marijuana prohibition, and it's been a tough fight, especially in those first few decades. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. You're founding NORML in 1970, and I know this, but maybe some people listening don't, is that the original concept behind NORML was the National Organization for the Repeal of Marijuana Laws, not the reform of marijuana laws. And lately we're talking a lot about framing and whether or not progressives should say one slogan or another slogan. So I thought that was kind of apropos of that idea. What was the motivation for moving away from the concept of repeal and instead embracing the concept of reform?
Well, it was really a suggestion made to me by one of the advisors I was going to early on when I was first putting NORML together, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. I had read his book, Crime in America, that came out, I think, in 70, I believe it was. And in it, he called for the legalization of marijuana. And I was surprised, because obviously having recently been the U.S. Attorney General. So I went to see him, and essentially I was looking for some reinforcement to assure me that what I was about to do made sense. I was, I just graduated law school, I was married, I had a young child, and there were a lot of people suggesting that starting a marijuana legalization lobby probably wasn't a smart career move. So I went to talk to Ramsey Clark about it, and during that discussion, first off, he said, do it. It's important. Somebody needs to do it, so do it now while you're young. And he said, then if it doesn't work out perfectly the way you intended, you'll have time to pick yourself up and, move ahead with your career. But in the process of, I met with Ramsey several times during the first few months we were putting NORML together. And initially, one of the things he suggested was that the acronym NORML would work perfectly well, but change repeal to reform. In other words, we were calling it at that time the National Organization to Repeal the Marijuana Laws. It was a fairly direct approach, but sort of like the debate over whether you should defund police that's going on today, when they don't, that's not really what people honestly mean. They mean to switch some resources into different types of policing so that we don't have people needlessly shot, or people have mental health problems end up being shot by the police. Well, the same thing Ramsey said I could do with NORML, change it to reform of marijuana laws, and it seems less confrontational. It's easier for people for whom legalization was a new concept. It was easier for them to embrace and not feel threatened by. At the time, I still preferred repeal, but I respected Ramsey Clark so much that I took his advice and we changed the name to reform. And I'm quite certain, looking back on it, that he was right. That was a smart thing to do.
It's kind of interesting how things develop, because now 50 years later, the federal government is actually looking at repeal. There's the Federal MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment Expungement Act, which was scheduled for a vote on the House floor, but then the House leadership and some of the centrist Democrats decided it wouldn't be a good optics to vote on marijuana legalization without having first voted on COVID relief checks. They said, oh, it's too risky. And then what do you know? 2020 election comes. Everybody that votes on marijuana passes it, even South Dakota. So have we reached a place now where the feds might actually be open for the repeal of marijuana laws?
Well, I think the House of Representatives is likely going to pass the MORE Act in the next couple of weeks. It's supposed to be scheduled for a vote in the House of Representatives the final week of the lame duck session. Now, it's not going to be brought up by the Senate, obviously, as long as the Republicans have control there. But there's a great deal of support for the MORE Act. And what it does, as you say, some people call it decriminalize it. Some people call it descheduling. But the reality is the MORE Act would remove marijuana altogether from the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Rather than just moving it to a lower schedule, it would simply take it out of the Controlled Substances Act so that the various states would be free to experiment with whatever version of legalization they might like to experiment with, or for those conservative states that want to maintain prohibition for a few more years, they would be free to do that. But at least the federal government would be out of the way.
So that leaves the door wide open for my neighboring state of Idaho to continue locking people up for hemp leafs?
Well, it would, but keep in mind, there's no real taste in this country to have the federal government dictating policies on social use, for example, to all of the states. When we ended alcohol prohibition in, I guess, 1931, the federal government didn't require states to legalize alcohol. They simply took it off they ended federal prohibition of alcohol and said to the states, you can do what you want. And there were several states that maintained criminal penalties for the sale and use of alcohol for several years. There are, even now today, there are still several dry counties in Kentucky and Tennessee and a few of the other southern states. But mostly the country obviously offers alcohol fairly conveniently to anyone who wants it. And I think that will be the same thing with marijuana. Over the course of a few years, all states will recognize the advantages to them of instituting a system of regulation and control rather than maintaining a black market.
Yeah, and this MORE Act, this is the one most recently Steny Hoyer, the House leader, majority leader, was saying this is going to get a vote, now that the election has passed. And of course, the other act that we're looking at the federal level, the Safe Banking Act, this one allows the existing medical and recreational states to extend banking services to their legal dispensaries, and something I've got some personal knowledge of now here in the state of Oregon. I'm helping to run a dispensary, and it's crazy. We have to get money orders from the post office to pay our taxes. We have to pay our employees in cash. It's just if their thought was we need to control cannabis, not having banking is the worst way to try to control that, don't you think?
Oh, of course. A totally cash economy invites corruption, underreporting of income and taxation, et cetera. But again, I think fairly quickly, probably by next year, they will manage on the federal level to amend that Banking Act so that you'll be able to have access to regular banking and credit cards and things like that.
You mentioned the U.S. Senate, of course. The Safe Banking Act passed the House. It goes to the Senate, where it's the graveyard. Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, has said he's the Grim Reaper on Democratic bills, to try to make any progress in this country. But with this recent election, we saw, it looks as though Joe Biden has flipped 5 states. Georgia's not fully in yet, but it looks like it's going to flip Georgia as well, and won by over a 5 million vote margin in this particular election. And as I mentioned earlier, marijuana was on the ballot in 5 states and passed in all 5 states, even taking 2 votes in Montana, Mississippi, and South Dakota. So assuming that these Georgia runoffs don't turn out for the Democrats and the Senate still remains in Republican hands, under a President Biden, do you think some of those bills, the MORE Act, the Safe Banking Act, could get a hearing, given that there might be more pressure on a Republican Senate to do something with all these red states now passing these marijuana laws?
Well, one thing for certain is with the Biden presidency, we don't have to worry that the federal government is going to all of a sudden take a hostile attitude towards the states that have legalized marijuana. They simply are not going to do that. As you know, under the prior administration, we actually had a DOJ policy, a written policy, saying they were going to respect the rights of the states to experiment with different types of marijuana laws. Unfortunately, that was repealed under Jeff Sessions, one of his first acts. Even though I recognize that as long as the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, the chance of actually getting the MORE Act enacted, they're slim. It doesn't mean you can't cut some kind of a deal. There will be certain things the Republicans want from Biden, and it may be that somehow in that mix we'll get the MORE Act passed. But the more important thing is the reason we want the MORE Act eventually is to get the federal government out of the picture altogether. And as long as Biden is president, I'm quite certain the Department of Justice is not going to interfere with any of the states that have decided to legalize marijuana. So in that sense, I don't feel threatened for the next 4 years. We've got some time to go ahead and make some progress in some additional states.
Yeah, indeed. Under the Obama administration, they weren't exactly positive on marijuana, but they weren't negative on it either. They didn't stand in our way. So that was very helpful. These politicians, by the way, to give them some credit, there's a reason why they were frightened by this issue for, 75 years or so. The vast majority of the public thought marijuana was incredibly dangerous. It was the reefer madness era. And as a result, the elected officials learned early that if you take a moderate position on marijuana policy and your opponent takes a hardline position, you're liable to be thrown out of office at the next election. So it has taken a while for elected officials on both the state and federal level to figure out that, no, it's actually okay now. As you pointed out earlier, we did better in this last election than did any of the candidates. We had 5 different states that had different marijuana legalization bills, and they passed in all 5 states. So yeah, not only did those 5 states pass marijuana bills, but they passed them with more votes than the presidential candidate who won that state got. Whether it was Trump in South Dakota, Montana, whether it was Biden in Arizona and New Jersey, Trump in Mississippi, marijuana outperformed all of them. So that's good news. Now let's take a look at the best case scenario. We've got the 2 runoff elections going on in Georgia. Suppose Democrats win both of those. It's 50-50 Senate with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris breaking the tie. Do you see progress happening then? Or, we've got blue dogs like Joe Manchin in West Virginia who could break that tie siding with Republicans. And also we've got Joe Biden and Kamala Harris not exactly having the best records on the drug war in their own careers. Could we get those things passed with the Democratic Senate?
I think there's a fair shot that we will. Now, you're right. Obviously, there are some Democratic senators from states like West Virginia where we have to be careful how we market these bills. I happen to think the MORE Act in particular can be sold as simply getting the federal government out of the way, letting the states decide their own policy. And I think that would be a popular position in West Virginia as it would in most other parts of the country as well. So, I think there's a fair shot that we would be able to get something passed. And even though I recognize Joe Biden in his earlier Senate career back in the 80s sort of led the charge on the war on drugs and minimum mandatory penalties for drug offenses, things like that. So he was not a fan of moderate policy back in those years, but a lot of people weren't. And he's come around, and at least he's come as far as to say he now favors decriminalizing marijuana. He hasn't yet embraced full legalization, but his running mate, or his vice president-elect now, in fact, has. She was also fairly law and order type when she was attorney general in California. But in fact, in the last 2 years, she's our chief sponsor in the Senate on the MORE Act. So I think there's a fair shot that what will happen over time is...
Oh, sorry for the cutoff there. We have to move on to hour 2, but we got Keith Stroup joining us in hour 2 to continue this chat. We'll look at the 5 decades of marijuana legalization and what are the craziest things that happened in those 5 decades. We'll look at your poll answers on Twitter on that, @RadicalRuss as well. For everyone here in Tragic County, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.